Welcome back, listeners. And today I'm very excited because we have the beautiful author Lily Chu with us today. Welcome, Lily. Thank you so much for joining us at Writer's Advice.
Oh, thanks for having me.
Thank you. So you're in a bit of a whirlwind because now you're the author of The Stand-In, which firstly, I actually have to thank you because it is the best, most refreshing, awesome rom-com that I have read in a while. And it is just so full of joy and fun. And yeah, it brought a lot of light to my life, as I'm sure it has a lot of other people. So thank you for that. But firstly, your journey is a little bit different. So you started your book being released on Audible before print. So are you able to let us know a little bit more about that and how that came to be?
Yeah, it's actually been a really interesting journey. So I wrote The Stand-In. All my dating is like pandemic, post-pandemic, pre-pandemic. Actually, we're not even post-pandemic yet. So I wrote it in the early months of the pandemic. So that's, winter, spring, 2020.
Yeah.
And then it went out on submission, and Audible was one of the publishers. So I hadn't written it for audio in particular. But through the auction process, we decided to go with Audible, and as well, we signed a print deal with Sourcebooks. So most books tend to be, if they do audio, it's either simultaneous release or it's a bit later.
Mm-hmm.
But mine actually came out in audio first in July, and it's coming out in print in May. So it was really interesting because the audio process is a lot different. It seemed much faster. But also then there's the experience of hearing somebody kind of tell your story and that moment of, oh my God, I can't make changes anymore, which is always for me, the worst moment in the world when you have passed the point of return. There's no chance left of changing, like all this, like, oh, but I should have, oh, but I wish, and that it's done. Like it's absolutely done. And listening to it was a real adventure. Like Philippa Sue was extraordinary. She made such a beautiful Gracie, and the voice was great. And it was hard for me to get into it at first because it was a weird dissonance between hearing somebody say the words I had written. That wasn't me. So, I would start it and stop it. And then I started and stop it. And then I was like, you have to do it. So I just went for like long walks. And at one point, I was walking past a location as I was listening to that scene in the book, which was kind of interesting. And there were points where I actually was able to lose myself in the story, which was such a testament to her ability as a narrator and her performance. Yeah, and it's done really well on Audible, and I'm looking forward to it coming out in print. I just actually got the print versions in the mail the other day, which is super exciting. Yeah,
it's a gorgeous cover. So it's coming out in May. Is that coming out in Australia in May as well, or? Oh, it's online, so it's going to be.
It should be. Yeah.
Yeah, awesome.
It should be coming out in May because it's, I believe it's World English. So
yeah,
I know it's definitely Canada, US, UK. So I would say yes.
Yes.
If not, let's get it there.
Yes, it is. Honestly, it's a gorgeous book. I really highly recommend everyone getting a copy and listening into the end to be able to win a copy as well. But so one, that is really, you're so right, being able to, when you've written this story and then listening to someone else read that back to you would be the weirdest feeling, but she did a great job. Like she really got me highly invested in it. So
yeah. And audios are really, I actually read all my books out loud. Like during the editing process, I read them out loud, and I also put them through like my laptop's, how you can get it to read out loud to you. I do that a few times as well. So I'm used to hearing it out loud, but there's a difference between, kind of a robotic thing or my like very fast speed read and hearing the performance.
Yeah. And did you have to do a separate edit for Audible as well? Because obviously there's a lot of less of this he said, she said things when people are reading it out loud.
Yeah, that's exactly it. So there is an audio draft where my editor went through and just removed a lot of the unnecessary tags, but then also um, it's not so much the SEDS as well as the, if someone is sighing or screaming or, there's a way that you can actually just do that with the voice rather than having someone scream and then she screamed. It's
Yeah.
so yeah, so that's the audio version. So it's not drastically different than the print version, but it does remove some of that unnecessary
Yeah.
dialogue.
Yeah. It's awesome. It's a completely different process, but yeah. There you go. I didn't know Audible was its own publisher on submission, like straight up now that you can do that straight away. So yeah, it's an awesome process.
Yeah.
So you wrote in, sorry, was it the winter of 2020 that you said?
I started writing it like early January 2020, and it was done June 2020.
Okay, so you've started writing the stand-in just before a pandemic hits. What was the process of, firstly, the story coming to you, and have you always been a writer and been in a bit of a creative field?
I'm actually a communications manager for my day job. So
Awesome.
I usually do a lot of writing, for my everyday. I'm currently on leave for a year, but it's always, I've been doing that for, I don't know, 20 years or something. So it's always been part of it. And I was writing fiction on weekends and at night and every time, I had some spare time. But I haven't always been a rom-com writer. And that kind of came around the summer 2019, I guess. My agent had kind of said, like, have you thought about writing rom-coms? I was like, no, I don't think so. And she's like, I really think you should give it a try. And I said, okay, I will take that under advisement, which means, never. But then some stuff happened around December. And I realized that what I was writing, I wasn't really able to tell the stories I wanted to tell with the characters that I wanted to be telling the stories. So I remember I emailed my agent, and then almost at the exact same time she texted me and she's like, we got to talk. And both of us were like, it's time for rom-coms. Like at that exact day, we both kind of decided we're going to give it a shot. And I had some ideas and, wrote up kind of like, what do you think about this? And what do you think about that? And she's like, let's try this one. And then, yeah, I wrote it up. Like my agent is kind of my, she's the one I bounced most of the ideas off of first. So I wrote it and then we went through it a few times and then out it went.
Wow, that's amazing. So you were writing in a different genre beforehand and had an agent. You both realized that you want to go rom-com for exactly like that's your style, and it's gone from there.
Yeah.
And you had a sorry.
She brought me on, the book she brought me on for was a steampunk romance, which we still haven't sold. So if anyone's looking for a steampunk romance, I have one.
That needs to sell. I love that.
Yeah, that's been years. So, it just goes to show that sometimes, the market's not right or the story's not right or whatever it happens to be. But, she stuck with me and we just kind of kept working through stuff. After that meeting in the summer, I had actually started writing like more fantasy, like YA fantasy, to see where that would go until we decided to go rom-com. So yeah, I try a lot of different things. Like, I've written historicals and paranormal and, but I really do enjoy writing rom-coms.
Yeah, absolutely. And you have another one coming out next year as well, which is another thing to be excited about. So you can obviously write across many genres. What do you attribute your creativity to be able to do that?
I think I read in a lot of genres.
Yeah.
I'm not great on visual stories. Like I don't watch a lot of TV. I don't watch a lot of Netflix. It's really hard for me to get into that kind of a storytelling medium. I'm very kind of hummingbirdy. Like it's hard for me to focus. But books I've always been able to focus on, and I read pretty much anything. Like I read, nonfiction and actually memoirs. I don't do a lot of memoir, to be honest.
Yeah.
But whatever kind of gets my fancy, I will read about. And I think it just sparks a lot of ideas. And I actually, recently I got into newsletters. Like, signing up for people's newsletters.
Yeah.
And it's just amazing, like just the because it's curated for you. There's so much information out there. I can't look at it all. But it's a great way to have someone who's really interesting, really smart, kind of handpick cool things for you to read. And then whenever I get an interesting idea or I see something or I read something, I have an Airtable database that I just throw it all in there.
Perfect. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and then whenever I'm looking for ideas or I'm stuck or I'm just bored, I'll just kind of look through at random TikToks or, here's a story from GQ or this weird website that I found. So it's just, it kind of comes from everywhere.
Yeah. And you can pick and choose and create an incredible story from that. Have you always been a writer? Oh, well, obviously through your job, you've been a writer and you've always wrote fiction. Were you a reader young? Is that kind of what got you into that as well?
No, I actually remember like the day I thought I could write something, I was in my 20s and there's a, I'd always been a huge reader, but it never, I guess I'm just, I don't know, not really with it or anything. It never occurred to me I could write a book. I consume books, but it just never in 1,000 years would I think, oh, I could write a book. That just seemed like something other people did. But there's this big literary festival called Word on the Street. And I remember I was walking around, I was looking at books, and then I was like, and I was kind of thinking about books and what a great story would be. I'm like, oh, I could write that book. And I was like, I could write that book. I could be the one to write that book. And I went home and I started writing. It is a terrible book. It's an awful book. But I went back and I looked at it. It's come through like 6 different laptops with me. I keep transferring the file over. And I was looking at it and it's so bad. But I still really love it. I love it so much. Like I love that book. It will never see the light of day. It's got plot holes you could drive a dump truck through. It's a total mess. But here and there was a turn of phrase, or there's a word, or there was a paragraph or something where I was like, that's not super terrible. And I think it's, every time you write something, you get more of those, that's not super terrible. That's okay. Like that's interesting until eventually, hopefully you get a work that's mostly not super terrible. But yeah, that was too bad. But that's when I knew I could write a book, but calling myself a writer is not something I did until recently, I think, probably. Yeah, that was a very difficult mental leap. And I don't know why. That's probably something for my therapist to dig out of me. But probably the first time I had to write it on a form was, where they have, you're filling out forms of like profession.
Yeah.
The first time I actually put in writer was like last week. That's the first time in my life I've actually put that in.
Wow.
That was weird.
It's really interesting because a lot of people I've been speaking to on this podcast, the imposter syndrome, or to call yourself a writer, is very common. Like I can't say I've met someone who's like, yeah, screaming it from the ceiling tops. And I don't know if that is because it is such a lonely task, I guess, so where you're kind of in the shadows with it for a little bit, like doing it as a side gig and seeing where it can take you. And then all of a sudden, if you do have something that gets signed and is incredibly successful, it's like, where's that moment that you can finally own yourself and be like, this is my thing. So yes, I hope that you're a writer a lot more often, because also it's been extremely successful on Audible. So Audible even put it as their download for a month, I think it was.
Yeah, it's on the Audible Plus catalog, but it was on their editors picked the top of the year, so it was on that list, which was fantastic.
Yeah.
But yeah, writing's a very weird thing. I think it's a very weird thing. I think any artistic pursuit, I think in Western society, we have a very, I'm probably not going to phrase this right, but we have a very interesting way of looking at art and people who make art. Mm-hmm. And there's something about saying, I am a person who creates. Like there's a difference, I think, between how we phrase a content creator, and if we say like, I'm a content creator, which is what I am, versus, you know, I am a creator without the content, right? I think it's a bit of a mind shift, because we're always like, how do you monetize it? How do you monetize it?
Yeah.
And for a long time, when you're a writer, especially, you know, there's always this kind of hope that eventually people will read your book, but for the most part, you're doing it because you have the story that you want to tell.
Mm-hmm.
And there's, you know, zero guarantee that anything's going to happen in that story. Like I got, I don't know, 15 books on my laptop that went nowhere. But you kind of still keep writing. So I think somehow when you write down that word writer, for me, it was very much a declaration of like, oh, okay, like I feel that I have reached this pinnacle of my career where I can actually claim that and not feel weird about it.
Yeah. 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 We need to see things. You're so right. We need to see things if they're monetized or more of a quote unquote job than to be able to
Yeah,
call yourself something like that.
yeah.
So, yeah.
And I think that's actually that's it's quite damaging in a lot of ways, because, you know, um, you get a lot of pressure from people saying, well, what's the market saying? What's the market going to do? And, um, you know, how do you still continue to do the stuff you want to do, but be successful? And I think, you know, when we're kind of looking at art in that way, it takes something like, I remember some friends went freelance, you know, like, and they always really liked writing. They quit, they started freelancing, but having to do that hustle took a lot of the joy of the writing out, because all of a sudden the thing you loved became the job.
Yeah.
And I'd heard that from, you know, I know someone who's a reviewer. Um, and again, you know, it's not that the love's not there, but part of it is taken over with, all of a sudden you're looking at it in much different ways than just the joy of creating something, or the joy of absorbing someone's creation.
Yeah, absolutely. And well, it does, especially if it becomes your way for an income. It puts this pressure on it as that's what it
Very
has to
much.
be, which
Yeah.
you can lose a bit of that love. How have you found that process? You're still working. You're on did you take a year off? You just said.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Yeah.
I'm on leave.
Yeah.
And it's been really difficult. It's because for so long I've just been, you know, it's almost like working two jobs, right? Like I would work my 9 to 5, which was, you know, it's never really 9 to 5. Um, and then at night I would be up to like midnight or 1 writing and, you know, doing writing stuff. And then weekends, that's what I'd be doing. And anytime there's a spare moment, that's what I'd be doing. So in some ways, it's just taken a lot of the pressure off. So I can now sleep, or I don't feel guilty about doing other things that aren't working or writing. I still feel a bit guilt, but it's been very, you know, I thought it would be an easier transition than it is. And I don't want to sound ungrateful, because I'm super grateful to have this time to be able to do it. But there's actually so much writing you can do in a day. You know, you can't, I don't know why, but in my head, I kind of had this idea. It's like, you know, you would sit there and you would write for, you know, hours and hours and hours. But I actually only have about 2 or 3 hours in me. And then it's just like editing, I can do much, much longer, but actual drafting, I max out at like 2,000 words, 2, 3 hours a day. And then I'm kind of jelly.
Yeah. Yeah. And I actually, I've heard that a lot. And it's usually that 3 hours where people are like, no, that's all you can do. You can't do more than that. And yeah, you're working from this different brain state. It's not something that you can sit down and be, you know, analytical on for a long time. So do you have a process of sitting down and getting into that creative zone? Is there anything that particularly that you do to start bringing that part of you out?
Not particularly, because I never wanted to, I can get really obsessive about stuff. So I never wanted to have a routine where, you know, I would light a candle and have a cup of tea, because I knew myself, if somehow that candle got discontinued, I'd be like, oh my God, this is the worst omen on earth. And, you know, I'm never going to be able to write again. So I really tried to stay clear of any of that, something that would kind of trigger a creative state. And it also helped that because I was writing in all these random times, it was just, okay, you've got time. You don't have time for the muse to come to you. You've just got to start writing.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't really have a routine. Like I have, um, there's an album I listen to sometimes because it goes on and I don't hear it anymore. I mean, I'm not going to say what it is because I'm not sure if it's a compliment to the artist or not. Like, it's not, it's not like a brand, deliberately made to be played in airports and background music. I think they actually meant that song to be enjoyed and listened to. But for me, it's just like, okay, it's on and it just kind of shuts out a bit of the background noise. But I'm not, I can work without it.
Yeah. 100%.
Yeah. Like couch, coffee shop, bar. I love working in coffee shops and bars, beaches, parks, airports, anywhere.
Yeah, that is, and that's really good how you say you can't, especially when you're like you said, you're writing until 1 a.m. You can't wait to let that muse come to you. It's like, if this is your thing and you love it and this is the story you're meant to tell and you've got to get it out, then you have to get it out in any way that you can with whatever's going on in life at that point in time.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Awesome. Now, do you have any particular advice for up and coming writers on the process, how to get published, or even if someone's making that transition from work to writing?
I don't know. I mean, there's so much you can say, and it's so dependent on everyone's specific situation, right? I think the one thing all writers need, though, is two things, I guess. The first is you have to have a thick skin. There's just so much rejection, and that's just the reality. Your stories get rejected, your ideas get rejected. Once your book's out there, not everyone's going to like it. So you just really have to remember to not take it personally. It's, you have to have a bit of that separation between you are not the work, you are not the book. Your value as a person is not how that book or that work is received. And I think that's really important because it's so easy to get, you work so hard on it and you do put a lot of yourself in there. So it's so easy to think a rejection of the story, the idea, the book, the whatever is a rejection of you as a person. And it can be very like, oh my God, just go hide. But, you kind of give yourself a bit of a time to be like, oh, and then you just have to let it go and keep going. And it's really hard. Like, I don't know anyone who's really mastered that. It's advice I wish I could take more, but there's always that oh no. And I guess the second thing is kind of with that, and it's eventually you're going to have to let that work go out in the world. So you can, if you're a writer who's just writing for yourself, you write your poems for yourself, you write your short stories, you write your books, your novels for yourself, and you don't want them to be read by anyone, that's 100% fine. Like, you're just doing it for the joy. Whatever you do is up to you. But if you are someone who foresees a future where you would like an audience or you would like to share your story, at some point, you're going to have to decide what you have done is good enough. Mm-hmm. And you're going to have to let other people read it. And you're going to have to listen to what other people think about it. And maybe, it's your story, take those opinions or not, but you have to just write the end and actually mean those two words. Because it gets really easy to be like, oh, I'm just going to change this character a bit or adjust this chapter a bit. And you get to the point where really you're just moving some words around. Like, you're not improving the story in any sort of way. And that's when you really need someone else to look at it.
Yeah. That's really great advice, because I think in any creative industry, when you're putting something out there, you could work on it forever, and nothing is ever completely finished, but it's that moment to say, no, this is good enough, and this is what the world gets. And it's really scary. That's a scary moment, because that means that you're kind of done with it at that point, and that means that other people are going to comment on it. And it's hard. It has to go to the separation thing, right? It's hard to be like, okay, out you go. What was that moment like for you? So it's literally debut day on the stand-in, what was that moment like to
No, it's terrifying. It's terrifying. It's, you know, it's terrifying and it's exciting, and it's all these emotions, because especially when it's a book like that, you know, a lot of me had gone into it, and I generally don't read reviews, good or bad, because I find them, good ones stress me out as much as bad ones do.
yeah.
So I try to avoid it. But, you know, you're just, sometimes people will tag you and stuff. And then so you see stuff without really meaning to. And so you're just, you know, that people are going to be talking about the thing that you did, like the story that you wrote, and you can't really do anything about it. You know, you can't say like, no, that's not what I meant, or yeah, that's it exactly, because those aren't really the conversations for you. All you can do is, you've done the best you can do, and you have to accept that. And that's the scary part, just being able to be like, well, okay, wow, a lot of this conversation seems to be about the ability to let go, which makes me think maybe I'm not 100% there mentally yet. But
Well, the thing that you have to do is, well, I actually don't know this personally, but this is just a guess. I'm guessing when you come to print, it's almost like a complete other release, because you're going to get different readers as opposed to
absolutely.
Audible. So you've not only gone through it once, you have to go through it again. But I think does it feel a little bit more like it's still the same book, but I guess it's like a second release for you. You feel a bit better with it this time.
Yeah, that's actually a really, that's an excellent point, which I don't think I kind of articulated to myself in that way, but it really is, because it is a, you know, there are people who really love audio, and there are people who really love print, and some people who really enjoy both.
Yeah.
On the plus side, I'm not as worried for the print about the reception, because I know that, you know, it's got a certain star rating on Audible, and you know, I assume, I hope, that that's going to carry over. So that's some of the stress out, that, you know, because when the Audible release came out, there was that stress of like, oh, how's it going to do? How's it going to do? So I have a little bit of that social proof, which is relieving some of my concerns about the print release. But it's still, you know, it's very exciting to see your book in print. I've skimmed through it, but I haven't actually read it in print, because I'm scared to, I'm scared there'd be, you know, like through the trillion rounds of editing and whatnot, and the eagle eyes of all the editors somehow would still miss something, or, you know, what have you. But it is beautiful. But yeah, it is very much like another release. And the fact that it came so many months after the audio release, yeah, I'm excited. I'm scared. Nervous-itis, as they would say on My Little Pony. So.
Yeah, that's amazing. Now, I have to thank you so much for joining us today. I have had the most beautiful chat, and I know that everyone is going to love this. I love that it's been about the art of letting go, because I don't know if that does get better. Maybe you get used to it from experience when you bring more and more out. But with anything in life, you know, it's especially when something's been so close to your heart, and it's not nonfiction, it still is fiction, but even through having these conversations with authors, you do see bits of people in their writing. You know, it's come from you, so it's this really close, beautiful thing that's gorgeous, because you get to share it with the world, and you get to share it with other people. And I think that's the beauty of art. But also, yeah, the process of letting go of that is, I think it's a constant thing. But yeah. Thank you for doing that, because you're sharing amazing art. So thank you so much for joining us today, Lily. Now, have you got, I'm going to ask you a couple of things. One, are you able to give us a little bit of a preview of the comeback that's coming out? And two, where can we all find you as well, and best get in contact with you?
Sure. So the comeback will be coming out on Audible in July, and it is about a ambitious Toronto lawyer who falls in love with a K-pop idol. I am so in love with Jihoon, who is the main character. I love him so much. So if you are a fan of K-pop, I hope you like it. If you're not super into K-pop, I hope you like it. it takes place in Toronto and in Seoul. And it really, I think, I love the main character, Ari. Her journey to me is something I think a lot of us struggle with in terms of, is your job you? Like, how much of your job defines you? How much of your job is the parental expectations of what you're going to be doing in your life? And then just kind of how her world explodes when she meets Jihoon.
Oh my gosh, I love that. That sounds beautiful. I have some friends who love K-pop, so I cannot wait to give that to them as well. So that's amazing. And where can we all find you?
So the website is lilychuauthor.com. And then I'm not on Facebook, not on TikTok, but I am on Instagram mostly at Lily Chu Author, and then also Twitter with the same handle, but I mostly am on Instagram.
Perfect. Excellent. Thank you so much for joining us today, Lily. That was an absolutely beautiful chat. And yes, if anyone has not listened to The Stand-In yet, you can now get your copy next month. So I highly recommend it. It's an absolutely beautiful book. Thank you so much, Lily.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.